Technically, it shouldn't fly.
It smells funny.
Well, can't smell as bad as... Wait. Not that.
This video will contain major spoilers for most episodes of Skeleton Crew. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you do. It's a genuinely phenomenal show. I understand why you might be skeptical about another Disney Plus Star Wars series, as even though I've liked them all, they have been pretty hit or miss. But it's really good. It distills and perfects the whimsy and adventure side of Star Wars in much the same way that Andor distilled and perfected the war and politics side. They are very different in tone, of course, but the production quality is equal. It's a really fun show with great writing and shockingly good acting from everyone involved. You won't regret it. Anyway, on to the real intro. The Onyx Cinder might just be my new favorite ship in Star Wars. It combines design elements from a lot of ships that I like, and has a lot of personality to it, making it almost a character itself in a way that we haven't really seen since the Ghost in Star Wars Rebels that started over 10 years ago. We've gotten other hero ships since then, sure, but the Razor Crest and Marauder just don't have that certain je ne sais quoi that makes the Ghost and the Cinder feel so special. But the intro is getting too long already, so let's dive right in. I'm Joey from Radio Free Coruscant, and this is everything there is to know about the Onyx Cinder.
Oh, we're being locked into an autopilot landing sequence.
Well, is that normal? Is it normal, do you know?
I'll cancel the autopilot and bring it in myself.
Design. The Onyx Cinder, at least in pirate form, had a bulky, wedge-shaped hull. I'll get to the original form in a minute. It had a cluster of antennas at the bow, as well as several round things that could be sensor arrays or escape pods. It was painted in dark gray with white stripes, as was tradition for many pirate factions. There were 2 large turrets on the top, 2 on the bottom, and 1 on the right side behind the cockpit, as well as 2 smaller bubble turrets on the top. The top of the ship also held a signal dish, which could have been either for communication or weapons targeting. The cockpit was contained in a module on the left side of the ship. At the rear, it had 2 wings with an engine mounted to the top and bottom of each. It also had 2 more engines at the front of the ship. All of these could swivel up and down for better maneuvering in flight, and could rotate vertically for takeoff and landing, or even backwards to fly in reverse. The bottom of the ship had 4 simple landing gear, and 1 boarding ramp at the bow. Promotional material also shows 2 more on the sides, but I couldn't tell if these were actually seen in the show or not. Both sides of the ship had an airlock just ahead of the middle of it. There was also some kind of device at the very front of the ship that looks like it could be a claw or something for grappling other ships. I briefly thought it was the cargo claw we've seen used a couple times throughout the series, but that's smaller, has 5 fingers, and comes from inside the ship on the roof of the boarding area. Speaking of inside the ship, it had at least 1 and almost certainly 2 decks. We see the kids enter the engineering room through a hatch in the floor, but it's hard to tell if that is because it's on another level from the airlock they came in through, or if it's because they had to go over or under the wall because the doors didn't work without power. It was certainly tall enough to have 2 decks, though. Obviously the cockpit module was 1 deck tall, and it was less than half the height of the ship, so I'm going to say that it had 2 decks. On the upper deck was the cockpit, of course, as well as a small dining room, crew quarters, and captain's quarters. As far as I can tell, these were all contained within the cockpit module, leaving the rest of the space mostly unseen. I expect it is probably taken up by cargo holds. There is a corridor with access to the 2 main bubble turrets on the top of the ship as well, but I don't think we've seen much more than that. The lower deck had the engineering room, 3 boarding ramps, the airlocks, and likely more cargo space. As mentioned, each boarding area had a small cargo handling crane that could pick up and manipulate cargo at least as large and heavy as an adult Shistavinen, or 4 children, or presumably 1 or 2 crates of credits. The most impressive part of the Onyx Cinder, though, is that almost all of the exterior details I mentioned were custom built by the ship's owner, TAC Renaud. They were part of an armored shell built on top of a Republic emissary ship, originally used to haul credit dataries from the Republic Mint on At-Atin. It was a virtually seamless fit, essentially a hollow starship built around the original ship. The shell was affixed to the original hull with explosive bolts that could be detonated with a hull demolition sequencer in case of dire emergencies. I don't normally interrupt ship breakdowns with commentary, but I just have to say this was one of the coolest and most unique VFX sequences I've ever seen. Tremendous kudos to Industrial Light and Magic for their work on this. I've never seen anything like it. The only things I can think of to compare it to are both from The Expanse, but they aren't nearly as comprehensive a transformation. The first is the Rocinante ditching its gas hauler disguise to escape the docking clamps at Eros, but that's just a bunch of barrels strapped to the outside of the ship. You can still see the original shape of it very clearly underneath. The other is from much later in the show, when the Pella drops its own freighter disguise as part of a sneak attack, but that's still just discrete pieces of scaffolding and cargo containers being blown off one by one. It's a much more substantial disguise than the Rocinante had, but still doesn't come anywhere close to seeing a whole spaceship molt like a crab. You'll have to let me know if you have seen any scenes that are a better comparison. Anyway, the original Onyx Cinder was quite different in design from TAC Renaud's pirate shell, sort of like a cross between an armored bank truck and a diplomat's Cadillac. It was long and narrow with a gently tapering main hull. It still had the wings and the 4 engines mounted to them, but the 2 forward engines were one of Renaud's additions. It did have 4 extra smaller engines at the rear that were covered up by the pirate's armor. Most of the weapons were Renaud's as well, but the original provided the 2 smaller ball turrets, and had 2 small turrets on the sides towards the front that were hidden by the shell. Finally, its landing gear were slim and pointed, like the landing gear of an oversized sheathipede. The sheathipede's landing gear was designed to prevent it from landing anywhere without a hard, smooth surface like a landing pad, to give the Neimoidians an excuse not to visit the Trade Federation's mines and farms. Perhaps the landing gear on the Republic Mint transport served a similar purpose, but instead of being born out of extreme classism bordering on xenophobia, it was a security measure to prevent it from being hijacked and taken anywhere other than At-Atin or other pre-approved locations. Not that it worked. That could be why Renaud needed to add different landing gear. His additions were already heavy enough to require an extra 2 engines to be added to the front of the ship, so landing gear with a contact area of just a couple square meters would have sunk straight into the ground. Overall, the original Onyx Cinder was a very sleek and almost luxurious craft, befitting its role as a transport for Republic emissaries and credits from the Mint. Behind the scenes, the Onyx Cinder was created by a team at Industrial Light and Magic headed by Visual Effects Supervisor John Knoll and Model Supervisor John Goodson. ILM first created a CGI model of the ship, which was then built into a physical filming miniature by the Johns and machinist Dan Patriscu. The CGI model was later updated to match the physical model after they were done. The miniature had lighting for the engines and was even motorized. The article about it on the Star Wars website doesn't go into great detail, but at least the swiveling engines could be moved, and I wouldn't be surprised if the gun turrets worked as well. The article doesn't say what scenes were shot with the miniature and which were CGI, but I would guess that the less action-heavy scenes featuring just flybys of the Cinder were all physical, and things like the escape from Port Borgo and obviously the hull demolition scene where it molts back into the original form were all CGI. There may have been scenes that were a combo as well, like possibly the X-Wing chase. We also don't know if there was a physical miniature for the Cinder in its original emissary form either, as the article about the practical effects that I got this info from came out before that episode aired. It wouldn't surprise me if they had just focused their efforts on the pirate version, but it wouldn't surprise me if they had built both for real either. Parts of the Cinder were built as a full-sized set too, such as the boarding ramp and several interior rooms like the cockpit, but we will probably need to wait for a gallery documentary on Skeleton Crew to come out to learn any more about that. Specifications. The Onyx Cinder was a medium-small craft, roughly equivalent to a Gozanti cruiser, though slightly shorter and wider. After TAC Renaud's modifications, it measured 55 meters long, 40 meters wide, and 13.5 meters tall, and I estimate the original version to be about 45 to 50 meters long, just under 40 meters wide, and I'm not really sure how tall. I guess the rear engines are the tallest point on both versions, so the original would have been pretty much the same height. I would guess its top speed to be quite high with so many engines, perhaps around 1,000 kilometers per hour in pirate form, and possibly a little higher without all the armor weighing it down. We see that it is fairly fast and maneuverable for its size several times throughout the show. Also, when it sheds its pirate disguise, the engine exhausts change from a chill yellow to a more energetic blue, possibly indicating that the engines are now receiving more power from the reactor, since it has to split the power between 4 large engines and 4 small ones, rather than 6 large ones. I doubt that alone would make it faster, but the lost weight certainly would. The Onyx Cinder probably had a Class 1 hyperdrive. Its crew consisted of a captain, a pilot, an engineer, and at least 2 gunners originally, plus up to 5 more as a pirate ship if all the added guns were individually manned. I suspect that they are probably controlled from the cockpit though, so they probably could have been operated by just 1 or 2 extra gunners. We don't know if the Republic emissary was originally the captain of the ship or if they would have been carried as a passenger, but I am sure it could carry at least 1 passenger either way. It could also carry a substantial amount of cargo. The exact quantity is unknown, but Republic dataries don't exactly look light, and it could carry quite a few. I would guess at least a few hundred tons, possibly into the thousands like the Sea Rock Gozanti. The original Republic Mint transport, as I like to call it, was armed with 2 dual laser turrets on the roof, and 2 forward-facing dual laser cannons on the sides. TAC Renaud covered up the 2 side cannons and replaced them with 5 dual cannon turrets all over the ship, possibly dual heavy laser cannons, ion cannons, or maybe even a combination of both. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a torpedo or missile launcher on board too, but there is no evidence of that. As for the price, we can only guess. The original ship probably cost somewhere on the order of 1 to 200,000 credits, and while TAC Renaud stole his, he would have almost certainly have to have spent tens of thousands on the upgrade, if not as much as the ship cost originally. History. Much of the Onyx Cinder's history is as murky as the hot springs at TAC Renaud's home base of Skull Ridge Mountain. It is told through legend and folklore by a lying pirate and a malfunctioning droid. Still, we can piece together the general story well enough. The Cinder started life as a transport for the Old Republic Mint on At-Atin, somewhere between 1,000 and 100 years before the Battle of Yavin. The exact year is unknown at this time, but due to the planet's mythical status, it was almost certainly not in contact with the greater galaxy within the average lifespan of most common species in the galaxy. Plus, if it had gone missing during the Clone Wars, the Republic would have likely thought that it fell into Separatist hands and put a bigger effort into finding it. There were 9 jewels of the Old Republic, all of which were presumably mints like At-Atin. 8 were destroyed, and the coordinates and navigation routes for At-Atin were lost. Personally, I would guess that *AtATN and the other jewels were founded and hidden during the Old Republic era as stated in the show, and the other jewels were slowly discovered and picked off one by one over the next 1,000 years or so, until *AtATN finally went missing during the High Republic period of 1 to 200 BPY. I believe that this was *TAC Renaud's doing. I think that the Republic emissary assigned to each mint was the only person with the coordinates to locate the planet, just like their ships were the only ships with clearance to pass the planet's defense barrier. *TAC Renaud somehow figured out this scheme and captured *AtATN's emissary and his ship, and forced the emissary to hand over *AtATN's coordinates before killing him and the ship's original crew. This left Renaud and his droid SM-33 the only people in the galaxy who knew where *AtATN was. Renaud renamed the ship to the Onyx Cinder, and using the credits it was carrying, upgraded it to a ship worthy of a legendary pirate like himself, and began plotting how he would conquer *AtATN and take control of the Mint. This process involved traveling to at least *AtACRN, and possibly the other jewels of the Republic, and striking the coordinates from their supervisors' towers so that not only would he be the only one with the coordinates to *AtATN, but the only one who would ever be able to know them. He even killed any crew member who saw them, and instructed SM-33 to kill anyone who inquired about the planet. Eventually, when the plan was ready, he and his crew returned to the planet to take over. However, at the last minute, the crew was consumed by greed and committed mutiny. Renaud had foreseen this, though, and locked them out of the controls, causing the ship to crash upside down in a forest on *AtATN, where it would eventually be buried and lost to the sands of time, remembered only in pirate legends and space shanties. At least a century later, in about 9 ABY, the Onyx Cinder would be rediscovered by a child named Wim. He believed it was a buried Jedi temple and brought his friend Neil to investigate. They also inadvertently attracted the attention of fellow students Fern and KB. They accidentally got locked inside and split up to try to reactivate its power systems to open the door. Wim discovered the cockpit and pressed a very tempting button that had lit up after KB restored the power.
What'd you do? There's a button, I pushed it. Jesus Christ.
This flipped the ship right side up, launched it to orbit, engaged the hyperdrive, and flew the ship to a random point in space before it broke down. Fortunately, SM-33 had also been reactivated, and he was able to make the necessary repairs to get them moving again. Unfortunately, he was unable to return them to *AtATN, and instead took them to Port Borgo to refuel the Cinder and get more comprehensive maintenance done. There they brought disgraced pirate Captain Silvo, also known as Jod Nanawood, aboard, who promised to help them get back to *AtATN in exchange for a share of the planet's legendary treasure. He took the ship to the observatory moon to consult his former friend, an astronomer named Kim. She wasn't able to locate *AtATN, but she mistook one of its sisters, *AtACRN, for it, and sent the crew there, though they had to fight off some New Republic X-Wings before they could leave. When *AtACRN proved to be the wrong planet, they instead went to the planet Lanupa to find the coordinates in Captain Renaud's base on Skull Ridge Mountain. With the coordinates secured in SM-33's memory banks, Jod mutinied against the children and attempted to take the Cinder, but he and 33 were accosted by his former colleagues and hauled away. The staff of the spa that had been built on top of Renaud's lair had the Cinder carried away by towing droids, who dropped it into a scrap pile at the base of the mountain to be incinerated. The children managed to recover it, but not before it was partially ingested by a scrapper barge. Fern activated the hull demolition sequencer to blow off the outer shell, and the original ship slid out of its pirate trappings and narrowly escaped destruction. With their home's coordinates also in KB's memory banks, and the ship firmly in their possession again, they headed back to *AtATN, where they lived happily ever after, and I'm just kidding, they got captured by pirates and Jod got control of the ship again. They recaptured it with 33's help, as he didn't like Jod any more than Jod liked him, but Jod snuck back aboard after he was thrown out and recaptured the ship again on their way through the barrier after it was locked into the Mint's air traffic control system. He killed 33, or disabled him anyway, as I'm sure a lightsaber beheading probably isn't as big a deal for a droid as it would be for you and me. Also, I just have to point out that the ship changed hands like 5 times in 2 days. Crazy. Anyway, the Autoland sequence took the Onyx Cinder straight to a landing platform at one of the Mint's warehouses and bolted its landing gear to the floor, which lowered into the ground straight to one of the vaults. That evening, after Jod overthrew the supervisor and took over At-Aten, Wim's dad Wendell snuck onto the supervisor's tower to release the locks on the Cinder's landing gear, and KB flew it outside the barrier to signal Kim for help after reactivating SM-33. They were shot down by a pirate gunship and crashed, but 33 and KB survived, and the Onyx Cinder appeared to be relatively intact, with just some minor damage to one of its engines. Hopefully, it will be fixed up and ready to go on another adventure in a few years if Skeleton Crew is renewed for a second season. And that's everything there is to know about the Onyx Cinder. I hope you liked it, because it was my longest video yet, or at least the longest script. Just the history segment alone has as many words as some of my shorter breakdowns do in total. It's just such a cool and interesting ship. Plus it's basically 2 ships in one, so that adds a lot to talk about too. Like I said at the beginning, the Cinder is possibly my new favorite Star Wars ship. I'll have to let it simmer for a while to make sure it isn't recency bias, but it's at least going to clear the top 5 for sure. I actually just finished a Lego model of it a couple weeks ago. It's the biggest thing I've built in about a year that wasn't an official set, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm also working on building the original At-Aten Mint version, but that is proving a little more difficult. Anyway, let me know what you think of the Onyx Cinder. You know my thoughts on it, so I'd love to hear yours. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on Skeleton Crew in general. Like I said in my mini review/sales pitch at the beginning, I loved it and rank it right up there with Andor. Personally, I actually like Skeleton Crew a little more. While Andor was phenomenal, and I'm thrilled for Season 2 coming out later this year, it was a very, stressful show that I haven't revisited since it aired originally. I'm just not exactly in the mood to watch the slow creep of authoritarianism strangle the life out of a fallen democracy these days, you know? No particular reason, it's just not exactly a fun time. Andor may be much more important to the mythology of Star Wars with huge galactic stakes, but Skeleton Crew is the one I'm going to rewatch when I need a good chuckle. I never thought a show about children running from pirates would be just as compelling as Andor and as entertaining as The Mandalorian, but it quickly skyrocketed to be my favorite Star Wars show and possibly even my favorite Star Wars project, period. It was an absolutely spectacular adventure full of both whimsical fun and deadly serious stakes. Christopher Ford, John Watts, and the whole crew have created something incredibly special, and I eagerly await the announcement of Season 2. But those are my thoughts, let me know yours in the comments. Finally, please like the video and share it on social media and with your friends. This was a very big project and a video I've been looking forward to making for weeks, so I'd really like it to perform well. And of course, subscribe for more Star Wars content and possibly some other stuff too. Let's just say the Onyx Cinder may not be the only pirate ship on the menu this year. But anyway, I'm exhausted, and I think 3,766 words is quite enough for one script. Thank you so much for watching, and making it to the end of this very long video, and I will see you next week. RFC, out.